Metal Slug! Mission 1, start!
Metal Slug is obviously the first in the series. What is the series? Well, basically it's a series of side-scrolling sort of run-and-gun shoot-'em-up games with mild elements of platforming, although it's mostly dodging projectiles, really. There's a little bit of jump and run, but not really a huge amount. As they're designed for arcades, they're also really, really difficult, although the earlier games, if you play them on a reasonable difficulty level, they're actually, I would say, fairly doable. They don't feel especially cheap. The first one in particular is really nicely designed to make it feel like you could do it, you could make progress. I mean, I can't clear it on 1 credit, but I think I could probably do it on 2.5, I don't know. I think 3 is probably my best, and that's, for an arcade game, that's not that bad, really. The Metal Slug, the titular Metal Slug, is a tank that you can find in the stages. In the first game, it's just the tank, it's just the sort of weird, Dominion Tank Police sort of style tank. But later in the series, you get all different kinds of, slugs. You get like a camel slug, and there's like a slug gunner, which is like a little mecha, and a sort of flying slug. You get the idea. They keep expanding and expanding. Anyway, the first game is extremely... they come in kind of confident, it feels like. They knew they kind of knew what they were doing. From the off, the elements are basically all in place. The series doesn't really, I would say, significantly change or evolve. There are diversions and there are distractions, as we'll discuss, but it doesn't. It came in like with more or less all of its elements in place. So what you're seeing now is basically what you're going to see for the rest of the video. And if that's a little bit tedious, I genuinely apologise, because we're going to do like 11 of these things. Because there's a lot. Because apparently it was very successful. Developed by, I want to say NASCAR. Not NASCAR, NASCAR. Which then sort of teamed up with SNK, or was part of SNK. I probably should have done some research, but that's just not my way. You're getting my knowledge here. Anyway, yeah, NASCAR with SNK developed this game, and as you can see, they did a pretty sterling job of it. One of the most remarkable things about the Metal Slug series is the sprite animation, which is pretty inarguably excellent. It's so expressive and cartoonish and intricate and detailed in ways that just honestly really aren't necessary. Like the waterfall in the first level is just astonishing looking to me to this day. It's really impressive stuff. So yes, you're ostensibly making your way from left to right, shooting bad bastards and freeing hostages. If you get killed, which is of course 1 hit in the early games, I'll explain that later. If you get killed, you lose all your hostages, so you have to finish each level in 1 pass in order to rescue all of them. I mean, you could die and then rescue some more and finish the stage, but the first time you play, it's not entirely unlikely that you'll end each stage with 0 hostages, and that's fine. You just need to get better, you need to play through and get good. And Metal Slug 1, as I said earlier, is one of the easiest ones, and that's not to say it's easy, but it is to say that it's not rabid bullshit like some of the later ones can be. I'm looking at you, Metal Slug 3. But yeah, it's nice, it's breezy, there's so much just wonderful detail to each stage. They haven't quite got like this. There hasn't got really the secrets or the alternate routes that the later ones have. But that's not really necessarily a bad thing. There's something to be said for simplicity. And while this game is definitely simple, it's well designed and it feels good. It's a good game, and I recommend it very highly.
Mission complete! Metal Slug 2!
Metal Slug 2, effectively more of the same. You've got a choice of 4 soldiers, Marco, Eri, Tama and Theo, although they don't have any unique abilities yet. More on that later again. And like I say, it is very much more of the same. It's left to right, scrolling shooting, with a fairly nasty line in projectile blood vomiting Arabs, apparently. It's got absolutely egregious slowdown in-game, as you can very clearly see. If anything is happening on the screen, this game slows down, and I mean anything. It is torture. What you're seeing is not like bad emulation. This is what the game is actually like, and you know, it doesn't entirely ruin the experience, but it comes close. And certain modern emulators can remove that slowdown, and the Steam port, for example, that you can buy, I believe that removes the slowdown too, which is nice because without the slowdown, it's a really great game. And on odd days of the week, it's my favourite one. It's got the same breeziness as Metal Slug 1 to some degree, but it's expanded on. It's got more of everything in a way that isn't ridiculously intrusive like it is in later games. I'm looking at you again, Metal Slug 3. And I'm not calling controversy when I say that about Metal Slug 3. I hope I can expand on that later when we get to the game, because I do like it, but I have my issues with it, which I will discuss in time. It's got much more exciting sort of set pieces. It's got better boss fights, in my opinion. Some people don't like it, but the second stage in Metal Slug 2, the mummy stage, the sort of pyramid stage, that's one of my favourite stages like ever in any game. It's got everything. It's got platforming, it's got awesome shooting, especially when you get the shotgun, although I'm now starting to think that might only be in Metal Slug X, which would be a bit of a clanger. We'll talk about that in a moment. It's got the camel sluggers in there. It's got a nice fun twist at the end. It's got a lot. It's a good game. It's got new weapons, it's got new enemies, it's got new everything. It's just more of Metal Slug. I mean, the only reason I guess that I could say you might prefer the first one is Metal Slug 2 is that little bit tougher. There are occasional points when you might be like, what am I supposed to have done? But nowhere near as badly as in like X and 3, which can be heinous in their difficulty in ways that feel kind of unfair. There's a lot to love about this game, but Metal Slug X is essentially the revision of this game. Let's talk about that one.
Metal Slug!
A lot of what I'm going to say about Metal Slug X also applies to Metal Slug 2 because they are kind of close to being the same game. Basically, it takes all the stages of Metal Slug 2, mixes up the colour palettes to make them a little bit more interesting, changes some of the layouts in ways that, in my opinion, aren't always beneficial because they tend to lean on the more complex, the more contrived sort of muscling through walls and enemies rather than Metal Slug 2, which has more sort of battlefieldish straight line. There are some enemies, but mostly you can breeze through it if you're good, which I tend to prefer because I like it when good play is rewarded by a flow, and like a game flow. And the later games don't really understand that good play means you don't die. It doesn't mean that you are doing so with any kind of flair, if that makes sense. If you're doing well in Metal Slug 3, it's because you're alive and you're finding a secret, which is not the same as blitzing through and just doing it quickly and doing it effortlessly. X has the advantage of being basically 2 but without the horrible slowdown, although as I said that's mitigated by some emulators. There are new additions to every stage. They've absolutely packed the game with features and content, which again, it's great if you're into that. Not so great if you wanted a breezier kind of experience, which this resolutely isn't, although it's still not as bad as 3 or like 5, for example. And again, we'll get to those games. I've got a lot to say about them, hopefully. It's a great game. It's got some of the most memorable stages, in my opinion, like the train stage, which is wonderful, and has a fantastic boss fight with this kind of sort of crab mecha thing, which, I think that the Metal Slug team might have had a bit of a crab fetish, because you'll be seeing more crabs. You'll be seeing more crabs later, and that sounds sexual, but it's actually not. There's, again, absolutely magnificent sprite animation happens in this game. It just looks incredible in places, and I mean, there's still nothing that wows me as much as the collapsing house in Metal Slug 1, really. It's got an astonishing final boss sequence. It's a really good game, despite all my nitpicking. In fact, I'll make that clear now. There isn't a game in this series that I would personally consider to be bad, really, or the ones I'm going to cover anyway. I'm not talking about the 3D games because I haven't played them, but by most accounts they're not so good. Metal Slug X, yeah, highly recommended. Little bit, some tedious kind of longers in the game, but it is pretty good otherwise. So yeah, recommend it. Metal Slug 3 is the last Metal Slug to this point, that was made by SNK Playmore, I believe, and it's widely considered by, I'm going to just say, the community to be the best one. I disagree with that fairly vociferously because I think it's got quite a lot of problems, but I do think it's very impressive, but that's not the same thing as being like a great game in my opinion. For a start, I don't like the way that it sort of takes away cannon fodder to a degree. There aren't really many enemies that aren't kind of hit sponges to some degree. Like the most basic enemy, the sort of crabs that you meet at the very beginning, still take about 4 or 5 hits. And again, I suppose that might be kind of nitpicking, but it just means that you spend a lot of time just kind of standing there and mashing the fire button, unless you've got a special weapon or something. I think it's fair to say that it's the best looking one of the series to date. Even it looks astonishing. Everything has just got so much love put into it, and so I feel kind of bad not being as enthusiastic about it as some people, but it just doesn't do that much for me for several reasons, and one of them is stuff like this, like swimming stuff, this underwater stuff. It's just, I don't know, it's not fun. I'd rather not be doing this. I'd rather just be running and gunning. And the vehicles just, I mean, it's kind of a problem with all the vehicles in these games, but you can't like aim and move in a different direction like properly. If you want to angle the Metal Slug tank cannon upwards, you have to kind of awkwardly swing it upwards. You can't really do diagonal properly. And as you can see, the sort of submarine tank we've got here, you can just tell by watching that it controls kind of wonkily. And you've got all this cool stuff happening, like right now you've got these huge eels coming out, and it's just so much artistry and so much love that I don't like being mean about it. And I don't think I'm being that mean about it. It's just I don't know, it's just kind of overblown to me in terms of gameplay. I mean, it's overblown in terms of visuals and aesthetic, and that's fine, there's nothing wrong with being bombastic, but I think it could have stood to be quite a lot breezier in terms of its gameplay. There's way too much stuff that just takes ages, the bosses just take so many hits in this game, and there's plenty of secrets, but not as many as in Metal Slug X, and it's got this hugely lauded final mission, which is about as long as all the other missions combined, it feels like. I don't think it is quite that long, but it does feel like that. And, it's impressive as hell, but the first time you do it is impressive as hell, but every time I want to replay this game with someone or whatever, I'm like, oh, this shit, I don't want to do it again. And I feel the same way about the zombie stage, which is another highly acclaimed section of the stage, but I mean, I'll try and show you what I mean. But if you get turned into a zombie, which is, of course, it's cool the first time it happens, but if you get turned into a zombie, you move like 1 mile an hour. I mean, every zombie takes about 10 bullets to kill, and they just keep coming at you, because they're zombies. And effectively, the level is just a straight line with zombies in it, and it's boring. It's not really better. It's not really like what I want from a game like this. I want to be able to keep moving unless I'm fighting a boss, which I get it. That's what fighting a boss is like. You're supposed to kind of face off to it. I mean, you can still obviously move around to dodge the stuff, but you get what I mean. There's no real game flow. It's very stop and start, and I'm not a big fan of that. I like there to be a consistent kind of flow to these games. But then, there's also the argument that that's the kind of game they wanted to make, and I can't. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that level of sort of, we know what we're doing here, we want to do this, we want to go out with this kind of spectacle. And yeah, it's spectacle over, in my opinion, particularly enjoyable gameplay. But, a lot of people will disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm looking for a different thing to what they are. I'm looking for something more in line with the first 2 games. I'm not really looking for this kind of experience of just sort of unending stages and bullet sponge enemies, which I just don't dig. I'm trying to think if there's anything else about this game I want to say. it's just, you know, quality over quantity. This game has quantity for sure. It has so many different routes and so many different types of slug, and so many different weapons and game player states, and great sprite work. I can't fault it. I can't fault it visually. I can't fault it sonically. In fact, I haven't mentioned yet, the music in these games is more or less routinely wonderful. They have great main themes. They have great remix themes in the later games as well. It's just great, and there's so much to love about it that to me it's just kind of a shame that I just don't dig playing it as much as some of the other ones. But you know, it could be a little worse. So let's move on to the next one. I think a big problem with Metal Slug 4 is there isn't really a lot to say about it. There's almost nothing new in the game. I believe there's a couple of new characters whose names escape me in a fit of unbelievable professionalism. I want to say Walter and Nadia, but that might be the Metal Slug Advanced characters. I don't remember. Anyway. It's a much more straightforward game than Metal Slug 3 was. There's way less in terms of ridiculous, out there nonsense. It's much more of a straightforward you versus soldiers game, and there are a lot of people who seem to kind of dislike it for that reason, but you know, I find it kind of a breath of fresh air after the sheer excess of 3. I don't think I'd go so far as saying it's better than 3. I think 3 tops it by being aesthetically so impressive, but it's kind of nice to play a game that's just so breezy again after... I mean, I think it's probably the breeziest, most sort of straightforward one since the first game. And if that's what you want, then, you know, you're going to dig it. I think it loses a lot in terms of spectacle, because even the early games have spectacular boss fights and things, but this one really, I would say, really doesn't. The final boss in particular is just astonishingly underwhelming. I won't spoil it, but I mean, there's not a lot to spoil, really. It's just kind of some guys. So yeah, I've not got a lot to say about this one, which is about the most damning thing I can think to say about it, really. It's a fine game. It's just a little bit bland. Metal Slug 5 is, for my money, a bit of a leap forward. It's very much... well, it's a Metal Slug game. The only thing it adds mechanically, if memory serves, is if you press down and jump, you can slide. Although I'm not sure if the slide makes you invulnerable like it does in something like, say, Contra Hardcore. But it may do. That's not a great response, but, you know. I feel like the game has a really nice sense of adventure. Like, from the beginning, when you're sort of being kayaked... I want to say kayaked, but they might not be kayaks... down this river and being assaulted by these sort of swinging sort of guerrilla style enemies, which is just, again, it's new, it's something cool and something new. Now I have this horrible feeling that they might have appeared in Metal Slug 3 and what I've just said is nonsense, but you know, it just feels cool. It feels like you're going somewhere, and you can say that about the storyline as well, and then it just abruptly drops the storyline after about 2 levels. That just stops happening. There's still a little bit of this sort of displeasing focus on stopping you and making you wait and making you do things incrementally rather than just like bish-bashing your way through, which is what I prefer. But it's a good one. It feels fun. It's got a sense of freshness after 3 and 4, well, after 4 I should say. It feels fresh, and it doesn't quite feel like it's back to the levels of almost molasses slow gameplay that 3 offers. It definitely recycles a lot, but there are new enemies as well, which is nice, because Metal Slug 4 basically doesn't have any new enemies. I think this is the one that introduced the Slug Gunner, which is a really, really cool type of slug. It's got some really cool set pieces, like this elevator section where these sort of weird turtle robots are sliding down and you've got to knock them off the wall with your shotgun. And generally, it's a pretty exciting game. It's got an amazing final boss that's got to be seen to be believed. And it's pretty demented, but not in a way that makes the gameplay feel slow. So yeah, it's a good one. Metal Slug First and Second Mission are a couple of games for the Neo Geo Pocket Color, That I'm going to review together because they are very similar, but that's not to undermine them because they're both really good. The second one is fantastic. The first one is just great. So that says a lot, really. I mean, the Neo Geo Pocket Color is a system that really doesn't have that much of a library that you can sniff at, really. It's got a series of really wonderful games. I mean, you have to like handheld fighting games really to get a lot out of it, but if you like SNK, you've got to get yourself a Neo Geo Pocket Color because some of the best games are on there. Anyway, it's different to the other games because, of course, a sort of relatively low bitrate, low bits, like 16 bits, 8 bits. Like, I don't know how many bits the Neo Geo has. I'm going to say 8, but it's probably more, maybe like 12. Anyway, it's they couldn't do a proper Metal Slug, like full spectacle on that kind of machine. So what it's more like is more like a sort of NES game with you run and gun, but you also explore, you find points items, and they found time to put quite a few pretty nice set pieces with pretty impressive graphics for the system. Both games are really good, both games are fairly similar. The only real distinction, I think, is that 2 is that little bit more interesting and has slightly better controls because they put grenades straight on the option key rather than you press the option key to switch between grenades and bullets. It's a fantastic looking game, it's a fantastic playing game, it feels more bite-sized, it feels appropriate for the handheld, and if you've got a Neo Geo Pocket Color, I recommend picking up both of them because they are well worth your time. Metal Slug Advance is weird. It's a weird game. Now, of course, the Game Boy Advance can't do a proper Metal Slug. I mean, they probably could if they really cut it down. But as you can see, it's cut down. It's not egregiously cut down. It still looks good, I think, but it's different. The main thing that makes it different, of course, is you have a health bar rather than lives. If your health runs out, that's game over. You're kicked back to the sort of mission title screen, the boot camp or whatever. And that's the other major difference. There's a list of cards you can pick up by rescuing prisoners or finding them in sort of secret hotspots. And finding a card will unlock it on the main screen, and some of them, quite a lot of them actually, are sort of variables that you can switch on and off. Like, for example, you can get one that turns the Metal Slug tank into the Slug Gunner. You get ones that basically permanently level up the power of your guns and permanently give you more health or give the tank more health. And, you know, that's really cool to me. I like it when games let you kind of, to a degree, customize your character or grow your character. It helps to make this game, it gives this game a little bit of a kind of, I don't want to say grindy because it's got negative connotations, but it kind of is. It's a pleasingly grindy sort of feel where, for like a handheld game, it feels like you can play and replay, and each time you play, you're likely to stumble across something new. I mean, there is so much hidden in each of these levels. Like, it took me a long time to 100% this game, because I tried not to use like a walkthrough, and there's stuff I'd miss on that level. I'd play through level 1 like 50 times and I'd miss stuff because they've done a really good job of hiding stuff. I mean, there is also some cheap stuff, like there's a card you get on, say, level 5 that unlocks an area in level 1, but there aren't too many of those. There's about 3 maybe, and that's not too bad out of 100 cards. Anyway, yeah, it's a fun game, and I'm going to sort of slightly spoil something now, but when you find a certain card called Dungeon, you unlock an extra stage called the Dungeon, which, well, no shit. But what it is it's basically an area where you can just gather more cards and more prisoners, because all the prisoners you rescue are listed as well. And the way it works is when you go through the dungeon, which has many routes, and when you find a card, you finish the level ends. You get the victory music and the level finishes, and then you can go back in and get another card. So that's the even grindier part of the game. So basically what they've done is they've adapted Metal Slug to a handheld in kind of a cool way. Because you don't get the exact same experience, but what you get doesn't really feel like you're getting shortchanged, because there's 6 levels, 5 sort of proper levels in the dungeon. And they're all pretty long, they're all quite difficult, and the challenge is it's possible to do it because it's made for handheld, it's not made for popping quarters in, so it's possible to do it and not feel like, Jesus, this is cheap as hell. And yeah, it's a good game. I recommend it. I think it's highly underrated. And this is the game that Walter is from. I think it's Trevor and Nadia. In this game, it's Walter and Tyra. Yeah, Okay, glad we could clear that up. Metal Slug 6 is the first one by SNK for a long time, and it's kind of all changed to a degree. For one thing, they've added 2 more characters, Ralph and Clark from the Ikari Warriors or King of Fighters series, and each character now has a special ability. Like Eri can throw grenades really far and in different directions. Marco's got a stronger handgun. Tama can lock on with the Metal Slug and then move in a different direction, which is incredibly useful. Part of me wishes that there was a character that had all the abilities, but unfortunately there isn't. It's made on different hardware to pretty much every other arcade game in the series, which was made with the classic Neo Geo hardware. This game's made with SNK's newer system called, I want to say, Atomis Wave, where they also made King of Fighters Neo Wave and Neo Geo Battle Coliseum. It's very much in the vein of the other Metal Slug games. The primary differences I've already mentioned, but because it's the first one they've done in a while, it felt like they wanted to push the boat out again, and as a result, you've got yet another sort of derisory, slow-paced dirge in places, although still obviously good, because I'm talking about bad for a Metal Slug game, which in my personal opinion means good. There's a lot more sort of collecting, there's a lot more combos. There's a new sort of combo system where if you keep causing damage or killing, your points multiply, which is nice, if you care about that, which I don't at all. The new Atomis Wave hardware brings you some nice zoom-out sort of panoramas to fight larger bosses, like this weird little leggy train thing that makes you wonder why in God's name they built it. They just didn't just give it wheels. But still, it's not a bad game. Little bit weirdly short compared to Metal Slug 3, because even though Metal Slug 3 only has 5 missions compared to the usual 6, it's as I mentioned, the last mission is about a day long. In this one, the last mission is not a day long, but it is almost ridiculously difficult, and you will die ceaselessly and without forethought. I think that the new hardware, in a way, leads to some slightly lazier looking backgrounds. I mean, I don't think the backgrounds look bad, but I think they lose something. I think the scenery loses something, because it's not quite so pixel perfect. It's more sort of like, here is a rock with a gradient, basically. It's not bad looking, but it definitely loses something. The other problem I have with it is I think this game is a little bit maybe a little bit cheaper, because you've got bosses like this one, which, rather than sort of being animated, it just seems to have kind of scaling, like the thing's legs sort of rotate. It doesn't look good, it doesn't look like it's there. And to me that's kind of an issue, because to me it compromises something that Metal Slug has literally always had, which is good looking sprite work. And while this definitely has good looking sprite work, you couldn't seriously say this looks bad. It's a little bit disappointing, because it's just not the same, it's not as impressive. Definitely worth a play if you like the series though, but it's one of my least favourites, because it's just difficult in a way that's not fun, and it's just a little bit uninspired in my opinion. It doesn't really make up for its sort of shortcomings with too much aesthetic excellence, a bit like 3 does. So while I recommend playing it because it's a Metal Slug game, I can't recommend it above really any of the others at all, unfortunately. Yeah. Bafflingly, Metal Slug 7 was released on the Nintendo DS, so yeah, it looks sort of like what you'd expect it to. It's a direct sort of continuation of Metal Slug 6. It has the same characters with the same abilities and everything. Of course, it looks ugly as hell. It looks washed out. The sprites look crushed, but the Metal Slug gameplay is there, which is nice. I can't take that away from it. And it's definitely not a bad game. I like it better than 6, despite the fact again it's missing some of the spectacle, because it is a little bit breezier. And I know I keep coming back to that word, but it feels a bit less stop and start. It feels, because it's been sort of designed for a handheld console rather than an arcade, it feels like the difficulty is better balanced. It doesn't feel like it's trying to take your money away. There are things that are wrong with it. They are mostly visual. It's not as inspired as something as, you know, the early games, but then again, how could it be? It's the 7th one, for goodness sake. Now, gamers, I believe at the time, were a little bit up in arms about the fact it was only on the DS, because it's obviously compromising it in terms of visual quality. So the game was later re-released for the PSP and I believe Xbox Live Arcade as Metal Slug XX, which is a sort of Metal Slug X style upgrade of Metal Slug 7 for the more powerful machines. Now, despite being called XX, I don't believe that it's got as many upgrades as Metal Slug X does when compared to Metal Slug 2. I think it might just be that it looks better, it looks more complete. The PSP version, it looks by default pretty stretched in my opinion, but you can always change it into 4:3. I've never actually played the Xbox Live Arcade version. I assume it's just basically like playing a big boy Metal Slug. Now, again, this game has the same problems as 6 in that the budget's obviously lower, so instead of using animation a lot of time they use kind of sprites, rotating or sort of scaling, which I'm not as big of a fan of, although I get it. I just think it looks cheaper and I don't really dig that much. Good game, well balanced for home play, definitely worth your time if you like run and gun, if you like Metal Slug, and to date, with the exception of the mobile sort of tower defense based games and the cell phone games and the 3D ones on PS2 which I haven't played and don't really want to play, that's the entire Metal Slug series. Now I hope that you've enjoyed this overview, which I can't imagine didn't get at least a little bit samey, but I hope it was helpful in some way, or entertaining in another way if not, or if my rambling did nothing for you, you could just look at the games. That's also an option. Now coming up next on Franchise and Lows 6, I've got another long-running series beginning with M. You'll find out what that is if you wait until next month, or go on my Twitter at Stupacabra, where I've already announced it, which means me teasing it just now was a complete waste of everyone's time, because you can just look it up, or ask someone, not that anyone would know. And now I've officially rambled on for too long. Thanks for watching.